Let's do a first impressions review of the Kvetun No. 3 rapier and matching dagger. Hi folks, Matthew here, Scholar Gladiatoria. So, this is the Rapier No. 3 from Kvetun Armoury and the matching dagger. Now, first up to say that whilst I'm not primarily a rapierist, I have found myself doing a little bit more rapier, particularly in the last year, largely thanks to Kvetun Armoury actually, because they sent me a rapier to review and I loved it so much I've been fencing with it ever since and I really enjoy it. Now, before we go on, just a little bit of background context. Yes, I do work with Kvetun Armoury on the Eastern Sabre, for example, and various other things. I have had no input whatsoever into any of their rapiers yet, partly because I don't consider myself a rapier expert at all. However, that may change in the future as I've started collecting antique rapiers and doing some rapier fencing. However, this rapier is nothing to do with my development, and I don't get any sort of royalties out of it or anything like that. It's just a rapier that's been sent to me to review. So if you consider me having any bias, so be it, but I don't think I do. If this was a piece of crap, then I would say it was a piece of crap. Now, I've been using a cup hilt rapier for a while. In fact, I did own rapiers before that. I've owned Hamway rapiers, I've owned Marco Donnelly rapiers, and various others in the past. But I really fell in love with rapier through the medium of Kvetun cup hilt rapiers, of which I've now got 3. And this is one of them. Now, the first thing to say is, for anyone who doesn't know, cup hilt rapiers are quite a specific thing, and cup hilts, certainly like this, are specifically really a Spanish and Neapolitan or Southern Italian thing. There were forms of cup hilt that you find later on in the middle of the 17th century in Germany and England and various other places. And indeed, you did get these Spanish-style cup hilts in other places. You did find them in France, for example, and as I said, in Italy, due to Spanish influence, and indeed the Low Countries, the Netherlands, Flanders, because they, at the time, were heavily influenced by the Spanish. So, this is a cup hilt rapier, and it's a very specific thing. It's also associated with specific styles of fencing. But what we have here is a form of Italian-style swept hilt rapier. Okay, now swept hilts are actually pretty much a universal style, although we find designs which are particularly Italian style or particularly German style or sometimes particularly English or French style. The fact is that swept hilts as a whole, that is consisting of a load of bars, and we'll talk about those in a second, are something that you find right the way across Europe, and in fact even beyond Europe as well. And these were the most common rapiers during the era of the rapier. What is the era of the rapier? Generally speaking, we're talking about 1550-ish through to about 1680-ish, okay? After that, we're really talking about the era of the small sword, and before that, we're talking about the era of what some people, and including me, call side sword, which is a modern term, but is useful. And the side sword is what really sits between the medieval knightly arming sword and the rapier, and the side sword, you could say, is a form of early rapier. But save that for another video. I have discussed it in past videos. But this is a swept hilt rapier. I'll just put the dagger down for a second. So, swept hilt rapiers are very popular for their looks and appearance in modern HEMA, and because they tie in with specific treatises. However, it has to be said that they do have one big disadvantage in competitive terms, because they do have openings through which your hand can be stabbed. Okay, now I think it's undeniable that cup hilts do provide more hand protection, at least against thrusts of other rapiers. And you know, that aside, I fully respect people that use swept hilt rapiers, not because they have any kind of advantage, in fact they have a disadvantage in modern competitive, essentially sport HEMA fencing, but because they tie in with specific periods or specific treatises. So if you are doing Fabrice rapier, then you should really be using a swept hilt. Even something like Thibaut uses forms of swept hilt as well. Really, these cup hilts, although they're very, very, almost, not, I won't say universal, but they're very, very popular in modern HEMA because of the advantages of them, really are only associated with certain treatises. Anyway, that aside, I love swept hilts. I think they look much nicer than cupped hilts. But as said, you do have to be aware of the fact that your hand is going to get poked more using one of these in competitive or club fencing. But nevertheless, swept hilts were the most common type of rapier throughout their period of use. So this is, as I say, rapier number 3, the romantically named rapier number 3. Kvetun have numbered their weapons, which makes them quite easy to refer to. And in a nutshell, before I go in a little bit more in depth, it's really nice, okay? It's beautifully made, beautifully finished, looks fantastic, looks almost like an antique actually, in terms of its kind of quality of manufacture, and it handles so sweetly. Now, just one comment about handling before I go into reviewing the parts, looking at its features. There are a number of ways of holding rapiers, okay? And this is going to come down to personal preference, the style that you practice, blah, 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 okay? So some people don't put any finger over the quill on at all. Some people hold the rapier quite flat. Some people put one finger over, and if you're doing late Spanish rapier with something like this, then you might put 2 fingers over. Shout out incidentally to the rapierists group on Facebook, because I've asked a lot of questions on that. As I say, I'm not a rapier specialist, and a lot of the guys there have been specialising in rapier for 20 plus years, okay? So they gave me a lot of good advice, a lot of information about treatises that I haven't personally studied. In a nutshell, there's a whole bunch of ways to hold a rapier. Hold it how you like, or hold it how your treatise tells you to tell it. There's no real right and wrong, okay? But with this particular rapier, I personally find, so in contrast, I personally find that with this type of cup hilt, with a short grip and a big bowl, I like to stick as much of my hand inside the bowl as possible and put 2 fingers over the lead quillon, over the guard, okay? So only 2 of my fingers are around the grip. That enables you to have a very short grip, which is something we see on late period Spanish rapiers, and 2 fingers over the guard, and that puts your hand closer to the centre of balance, gives good hand protection, and gives a good feeling in the hand. I personally find, whilst I can hold this rapier like that, it somehow doesn't feel right. And equally, it probably wasn't right for most of the treatises and most of the fencing masters who were using this type of swept hilt. I find with this one, the absolute most comfortable way to use it is with 1 finger over the quillon, which you could say is statistically the most common way of holding a rapier. Not to say it's the most correct, it's just the most common. So most rapiers throughout history were probably held this way, with 1 finger over the front quillon, inside the finger ring. And these finger rings developed specifically for that purpose, originally with earlier arming swords and side swords. And so those finger rings developed and the rest of the hilt kind of grew out from there. So now let's look at the parts of this rapier, which I prefer to hold with 1 finger over. So first up, let's look at the hilt. We have what we should call almost, I don't know, a sort of plumb bob, a kind of plum shaped actually pommel, okay? So it's circular in that sense, it's a bit longer than it is wide, and it has flutes down it. I think that looks really nice, and it ties in with the fluting on the rest of the hilt, around the quillon, around the side ring, all of the other bars, okay? And incidentally on this central escutcheon as well there, which we're talking about in a second. The grip is not overly long. Now, I find a lot of reproduction rapiers have grips which are overly long compared to original rapiers. I think the reason people do this is because they're thinking, oh, well, it's a modern HEMA practice weapon. Someone's going to be wearing big gloves to protect their hands. Not always with rapier. Actually, a lot of people just wear simple leather gloves with rapier, or modern fencing gloves even. So they make the longer grip. The problem with the longer grip is it can get in the way. It changes the heft and balance and feel of the weapon. I'm not a fan. It also looks goddamn ugly with a style of hilt that isn't supposed to have an overly long grip. So I absolutely love the fact that Kvetun have got a grip that looks right. In other words, the pommel should sit in right at the base of the hand there when you're holding it with 1 finger over. If I put 2 fingers over, this grip would be a bit too long. And if, as I said, if we look at other types of rapier, like the Spanish cup hilt, they do have shorter grips, largely for that reason. But with this type where you're only going to put 1 finger over, or possibly no fingers over, that is the correct length grip. It is not overly long. It's absolutely perfect for me. So love the pommel. Also, I'll point out, if we just come in close, this little bit here, I think, is one piece with the pommel. I think it's probably done on a lathe, and it's beautifully detailed, little flute around there. It might be a separate piece, might be a solid piece, I'm not really sure. The pommel is peened at the end, so this is traditionally put together, it's not screwed together, although some were screwed together in this period. Now the grip, let's talk about grips. So I've had a fairly long-standing relationship with Kvetun. Initially, I just was trying to get them to develop things for me, essentially, and then we entered into a business arrangement. But I am always, and I work with other companies as well, as you know, okay, I'm always candid about even the companies I'm working with, because frankly, if you don't keep moving forwards, you get left behind, okay? And I have always considered one of the weak points of older generation Kvetons was the grips. I always thought they made amazing blades, pretty good hilts, which have got better and better over time, but the grips were lagging behind. The grips were their weakest point, okay? That's all changing, okay? On the latest generation of Kvetun swords that I have received and looked at and used, their grips have shot up in quality. So first of all, it has a better shaping to it. Really, really nice. Little bit of swelling here. It sits really well in the hand. But perhaps most notably, it has a cord impressed leather wrap over the wood. And pretty good, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but pretty good seam down here, which is not stitched, it's glued. This means that in the hand, this feels like a high-end sword, and it is a high-end sword, okay? This is not cheap. I think this is on their website for 650 euros, so it's not a cheap sword. It is a good, I wouldn't say it's not top end though, you can certainly get more expensive rapiers than that, but it's, you know, a medium range price for a HEMA practice rapier. It's fairly high-end, but the grip matches that now. And in the past that didn't, okay? So Kvetun grips are getting better, and I've seen this on other things like long swords and things that they've been making. All of their grips that I've seen recently have improved. So really, really great, and it's moving up there into the real top-end comparisons. Now, in terms of the guard, this is a specific type of guard which has one main side ring, which isn't really a ring because it sweeps down from the top of the rear finger ring, which isn't a finger ring, it's just there to balance the front finger ring and provide a bit more distance between your hand and the opponent's blade if it slides down. This sweeping sidebar has got the flutes in it, which the whole rest of the guard has, so it matches, ties in with the pommel as well. And it sweeps down in one clean line here. There's no, it doesn't join at the bottom there. That actually gives quite a nice gap for the hand to maneuver around here without clashing against the side of a side ring. So I really, really like that because it essentially buys more space for the hand to give a little bit more freedom of movement at the back and different hand positions you can utilize. And then instead of having a second ring, because some of them up here do have a second ring or various other arrangements, they have these two drooping bars. Now, I can't remember, this is in AVB Norman's book, I can't remember his typology number for this, but this is a relatively popular style that you'll see on a lot of 17th century rapiers. So this is a type of rapier that really could date anywhere between about 1580, 1590, all the way through to the, well, really probably about the 1630s, okay? So this covers a period, essentially the Elizabethan period into the Stuart period. So it's a bit earlier than English Civil War, though some of these would have still been around by that time. 30 Years' War, sort of a little bit early for that, but it certainly covers the kind of famous Elizabethan period of things like Sir Francis Drake and all that kind of stuff. So, and Shakespeare in fact. It also covers certain treatises, so this would be contemporary with George Silver, Joseph Swetnam, and a whole bunch of Italian rapier treatises which date to about 1600. Now, the blade. So first up, the blade is 43 inches long, that is about 109 centimetres. And it has a fuller in it, okay? So it has a fairly plain, but very thick, I have to point out. This is over 7mm thick ricasso. A lot of rapiers on the market you'll buy out there are not thick enough at the base of the blade, okay? Rapiers, to handle correctly, to move, to have the correct heft in the hand, really need to be very thick at the base, I find, to give them the requisite stiffness. Otherwise they end up too floppy because they're narrow blades. So this is about, I think it's about 7.2, 7.3mm thick at the base. The blade is 109 centimetres long. We'll talk about the flex in a second. It has a fuller running from essentially just above the guard up to about 40% of the way up the blade, not quite half, which obviously looks very nice and removes a bit of mass off the broadest section of the blade. And overall, incidentally, the weight of this is, so if you look on the website, I think it says 1160 grams. I actually weighed this one's 1170, but 10 grams is actually in very tight tolerance. So any production sword you buy, there'll be a tolerance above and below what it says on the website. This is very, very close to what it says on the website. So it's a fairly light rapier. And it must be said that once you get into cup hilts tend to make swords heavier, although not always, depending how the cup hilt's built and if it's perforated and things like that. So this is a thick blade. It's about over 7 millimeters thick there, and it stays thick to about here. That means that when you're binding another person's blade, you've got a really, really stiff section. Very stiff for parrying, if someone cut at you, for example, with something strong. But just pushing against another blade, it gives you a very, very positive feedback and stiff blade here. Barely flexes at all in the first half of the blade. So the flex is left in the second half of the blade. So it flexes, I would say, evenly between the 50% and 100% marks, between the middle and the tip, essentially. I should also mention this has a rolled tip. Rolled tips are my personal favourites, as any regular viewers of the channel will know. Some people hate them. Some people prefer a flared tip or a nail tip. Those are all possible, and those are all options. So if you order this from Kvetun, you can get it, you can alter the blade length if you want. If you want one a bit longer, I think they can do that. But equally, all of their blades have variable tips. So if you want a flared tip or a nail tip, you can get that. If you just want a cut-off tip, you can get that as well if you just want to put your own tip on the end. So the tips are optional. I just prefer a rolled tip because personally, I find it doesn't need anything extra on it. I know some people disagree with that, that's fine. But we haven't had any issues just with rolled tips in our club with longswords, sabres, rapiers, everything. Right, so as I say, the blade flexes in the second half. It's got really good flex. It's not the stiffest rapier I've got. It's certainly not the floppiest rapier I've got. And putting against the thing, it flexes pretty easily with a positive thrust. Okay. The steel, I've never had any problems with Kvetun's steel except when there's been a flaw in manufacturing. These have a 1-year guarantee. So 1-year warranty. If it does break within 1 year due to normal use, they'll send you a replacement blade. It's as simple as that. Or they'll, if you send them a hilt, they'll, because obviously this is peened, then they'll fit a new blade to it. Good hardness, they stand up well against other blades. They seem to be, I mean, on the website, I think they say these are about 50 Rockwell, 48 to 50 Rockwell. I think that seems correct as far as I can tell based on their interactions with other makes of blades like Reginier and Siggy and things like that. The steel is good quality and good hardness and seems to be tested well. Now, just quickly, before I talk about the anything else, the dagger. So the dagger is very much made in the same style. You can see the fluting on the escutcheon in the middle. And I'll talk about the escutcheons on both of them in a second. Matches and the guards and the pommel, they are a matching pair. You can just buy the rapier. I think you can just buy the dagger, or you can buy them as a pair. Now, in terms of the left-hand dagger, so their blades are really, really light. They are fairly flexy, but still quite stiff. I'm actually not a fan because many years ago I saw a nasty accident where one of these flexed, overflexed, bent, snapped, and stabbed someone in the chest. Because this is a short blade, it actually comes under quite a lot of stress when it flexes, more so than a longer blade where it's more spread out. So I'm happy with the fact that this is relatively broad. So if it did break, you'd still be left with a fairly broad shank. But also I'm quite happy with the fact that it's not overly flexy. It's relatively stiff. So you're not going to really hurt someone a lot due to the stiffness, but equally it's got, so it's got a decent amount of flex, but equally it's not got so much flex that the steel's going to get stressed really, really easily. Note, unlike many left-hand daggers, this one does not have a side ring. Now, I personally prefer a left-hand dagger with a side ring because it protects you better, okay? You can get left-hand daggers with big sail guards and all sorts, and even knuckle bows on some of them. But personally, I find a side ring is usually enough. But because you're holding the dagger like this, so the person's blades are coming down here, sometimes they come down at an angle whereby it would hit you on that lead finger, and having that side ring does protect. So just to be aware, this particular dagger doesn't have a side ring. It might be possible if you asked one to have one put on. In terms of the grip as well, just want to mention, flatter in that direction, broader in this direction, gives great edge alignment, great indexing, really nicely done leather wrap. Just have a look here, really nicely done leather wrap, very, very tidy, top-notch stuff, really like it, big fan. And it's beautiful, it looks great. I mean, they look absolutely awesome as a set together, and they handle great. Now, one thing I will just notice, so The escutcheon on the dagger here is nice and smooth. So one of the things about rapier and daggers is your hands interact with a lot of different points on them. So unlike perhaps maybe like a long sword or something like that, your fingers and your hands and soft, squishy, delicate parts of your hand wrap around and contact with a lot of parts of the hilt. Now I will say the dagger is perfectly smooth on all parts. No pointy bits, no rough bits, nothing like that. No criticism there whatsoever. One thing I have noticed is the top part of this languette escutcheon, what you ever call it there, is just a little bit pointy up there. So but it's not on that side. So I would say to Kvetun, constructive feedback, try and make sure that anywhere where the fingers and the hand is wrapping around the guard is smooth and rounded, because I do have a tiny bit of a hot spot up here. Everywhere else is fine. Over the guard is fine, around this side is fine. It's just on that inside, and to be honest, when I hold it, I only feel it if I happen to put my thumb up and my thumb catches on there. It's just a little bit rough on that tip. So I'm going to sand that off, and then or possibly file and then sand it, just so it's a little bit more rounded, and then I think it will be perfect. In terms of their solidity, you can hear rings like a bell, nothing moves, absolutely rock solid. This is an anvil down here I'm hitting on. Really, really solidly made. So overall, first impressions, I deliberately haven't used these for fencing. I've actually had these for a few weeks now, so apologies to Kvetun for lagging behind on my reviews. I haven't used these for fencing yet. I'm probably going to take them to fencing tonight because I wanted to do a first impressions review before they got battered and not notched, but you know, kind of knocked around in training. First sight, straight out of the box, absolutely gorgeous, absolutely love them. I'm looking forward to getting back to the challenge of using a swept hilt again, because I think I've come to over-rely on my cup hilt to protect my hand a bit, so I need to watch out for that. And I have to say, I am one of those annoying people who in fencing exploits other people who've got an exposed hand, and I like to poke people in the hand, so now I'm probably going to have it done to me. Anyway, I'm looking forward to putting these to good use, probably tonight actually at fencing. I hope this has been a useful first impressions review. Obviously the link to these products are down below under this video. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel soon. Cheers folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks!